So about 2 million tons of wool is produced every single year, with 60% of that being used for clothing and just in general apparel. And this is a lot, this is a lot of suffering, exploitation on the animal's part. So in this video we'll be going through 5 reasons why you should ditch wool. So you might be thinking, what's the harm in taking someone's wool? The sheep is going to overheat, right? But that's actually wrong. And point number 1 is that they're genetically manipulated and modified to produce more wool on their skin, because obviously to meet demand. And just like cows in the dairy industry are genetically modified to produce 10 times more milk, well, in the wool industry it's exactly the same, and they're genetically modified to produce more and more wool. And this is not natural, If you would leave the sheep alone, and if they were not genetically manipulated, then they would not produce that much wool and they would be able to survive the cold and the heat. Taking the fleece off a sheep that genuinely needs to be sheared is different to taking the fleece of a sheep just to exploit it and profit off the animal. And where the sheep is just viewed as a commodity and they're not seen as individuals with personalities who fear, who can feel emotions and just in general suffer and feel pain. Point number 2 is that the shear workers are actually paid, most often they're paid by volume and not by hour, which encourages them to work faster, and when they work faster they can injure their animal, and most of the time that is the case. These animals, they suffer from frequent injuries, and so much so that it can get to the point where the wound is so serious that it needs to be sewn with a needle and thread. And because the process is so fast-paced, the shearer can actually cut off the tail or the ear of the sheep. Point number 3 is that shearers were actually caught punching and kicking and stomping on the sheep, and also hitting them in the face with electric clippers and standing on their heads, necks, and so on. One was actually seen beating a lamb with a hammer, and another was seen using the actual sheep to wipe the urine off the floor, with another twisting the neck and breaking its neck. Point number 4 why you should ditch wool is that within weeks of birth the lamb's ears are hole punched and their tails are chopped off. And the males are also castrated without any painkillers. The male lambs are actually castrated when they're between 2 or 8 weeks, and sometimes the lambs won't even survive this process because it's so painful. The method is usually making an incision and cutting their testicles out, or with a rubber ring which is used to cut off its blood supply. And this is one of the most painful methods for castration. And when the lamb's testicles don't fall off as expected, the shearer will just go ahead and use a clipper to remove the testicles. Point number 5 is that every year hundreds of lambs actually die from exposure or starvation. And even mature sheep die every year from disease, lack of shelter and neglect. Point number 6 why you should ditch wool is because of the transportation of these animals. Some sheep, like Australian sheep, are shipped to the Middle East on multi-level and crowded ships. And the journey can take weeks, and when they arrive then they are pulled by their ear or leg and sent to a slaughterhouse for their throat to be slit. Point number 7 is that there are actually many durable and stylish and warm fabrics that you can use that don't involve animals or their skins, and they aren't made from wool. So in conclusion, wool doesn't involve just sheep, it can involve also alpaca and many other animals. And you have to remember that the wool industry just sees these animals rich in money. They don't see them as with their own personalities, having the ability to suffer and feel pain. They don't see any of that. They just see a sheep and they see money, or an alpaca and they see money. They don't see inside these beautiful creatures. And if there's one thing that you can take away from this video, is that the sheep, they all have personalities, and they all, they want to experience life just like we do. They're conscious and they don't want to be in a slaughterhouse. They want to be free, roaming around. And at the end of the day, no matter what animal, they are individuals that do not want to be exploited and do not give consent. And remember that when you support the wool industry, you effectively support the meat industry of lamb, of sheep, and vice versa. So if you support the meat industry, lamb, then you support the wool industry as well automatically. So that's the end of the video. I hope you thought about wool, and I hope that from now on you won't be purchasing wool from what you've seen. So remember that one by one, we can make a difference.